Okay, thanks to everyone joining online and as well as the large crowd that we have here at the University of Canterbury. So it's Brendan Bradley here speaking, and it's my pleasure this morning to introduce a tag team that we have from the Quake Centre. You can see Rob Finch's name there, who's the director of Quake Centre, but we also are going to have Larry Bellamy from the Department of Civil and Natural Resources Engineering, who's the research director of the project that they're going to be talking about today, and also Greg Preston, who's the manager at the Quake Centre as well. So this is a good chance for all of the QuakeCoRE community to hear the great work that Quake Centre is doing, and building on the strong partnerships between our two organisations over the past, as well as what this particular BIT program means for the future in that regard. So happy to hand over Rob to start, and I'm sure many of us will have some interesting questions for all three of you at the end.
Great, thanks Brendan. Thanks to you and the management team of QuakeCoRE for providing us with the opportunity to speak with you. I know quite a number of the faces in the room and a number of the names that I could see up there that were dialed in, but not all of you. So for those of you that I haven't met before, my name is Robert Finch, and I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes giving you an overview of the Quake Centre. I will then hand over to Larry. Jeff, come in, sir. I'll hand over to Larry, who will then provide you with an overview and some insights of a major program that we now have running, which we call BIP, or Building Innovation Partnership Program. And then he will hand over to Greg Preston, who will then talk to you in more detail about one and maybe two of the themes associated with that program. So, for those of you who may not know what the Quake Centre really is and a little bit of its background, this is really by way of context so that you can get some understanding of when and how and why the Quake Centre was originally formed. So it's an industry-funded organisation. It's hosted here at Canterbury University. It was commenced in early to mid 2013. I think, strictly speaking, it was about March 2013. Greg was, in fact, the very first employee in the Quake Centre. He came along before I came along. And it was one of several initiatives of Canterbury University at that time. And I guess it was in some part driven by an acknowledgement of the benefit of having so many industry people coming back on campus at that time through technical clearinghouse activities and other things that were happening, and the building again of interactions and relationships between some of the academics in engineering, but in other faculties as well, and industry people. And so the initiative was taken to set up this thing called the Quake Centre, which was supported by a significant body of industry and still remains that way today. So the primary purpose really, or remit of the Quake Centre, is to identify solutions to industry identified needs, whether that be in earthquake engineering or in training related to that, and to set about trying to deliver solutions related to that. In more recent years, that remit has expanded beyond earthquake engineering, and really that's what the BIP program is a reflection of, but I won't talk too much about that. Larry and Greg will. In terms of size, the total funding pool, excluding what we have with the MB matching funds, is from the partnership base is about $1 million per annum, give or take a little bit. So just to give you some sort of understanding of the model of the Quake Centre and how it works, we have direct industry support, as I've suggested to you here. It is in the form of about 23 different industry organisations who we have conveniently categorised into 4 sectors, just so that we can delineate project areas that relate to those particular areas. Consultants is one, local government and central government is another, suppliers and contractors is the third, and the fourth we call the large asset owners, but really what that means is it's those organisations that have the major hydro power assets in New Zealand, so it's the likes of Genesis and Trustpower and Meridian and so on. We have a governance structure which reflects those 4 sectors. So we have 4 industry elected directors, board directors on the Quake Centre board, one of each representing those 4 sectors, and they are coupled with 3 university appointed directors. And one of those has, right from the beginning, has been Pierre Conville from Auckland University. And this is a reflection of the fact that we have maintained a very strong collaborative and working relationship with Auckland University right from governance level down, from the very inception of the Quake Centre, and that's important. We enjoy very good support from Civil Engineering Department, Civil and Natural Resource Engineering Department here. We are formally part of Civil and Natural Resource Engineering Department, and so fit within the College of Engineering in that respect. And this, I guess, is a reflection of, just in really broad terms, how we work. It's understanding the needs that industry have, and historically and continues, Greg and I spend a lot of our waking hours trying to figure out exactly what industry needs in one area or another, and then getting some board approval to carry out some work, and then delivering an output to industry. So that model has now changed somewhat, and this is a reflection of the broader remit that we now have, which is accepted by the board. We still have an earthquake engineering component, and we'll probably have for the foreseeable future, to be honest with you. But very importantly, we now have the BIP project or program, Building Innovation Partnership Program, which enables us to get matching funding from MBI. So our industry funding pool now is effectively split. We have some coming directly into the BIP program, and we have some coming into project activity and other initiatives that we still do with just our pure Quake Centre hat on, if you like. So this funding relationship here is a 60-40 one. 60% of the funds for the BIP program come from industry, 40% come from MBI. So our remit is a whole lot broader now than it was, and is not just about earthquake engineering solutions, it's about infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure solutions. I've just got a couple of more slides that I'm going to present to you, and then I will stop and hand over to Larry. I guess one of the important things that our partners recognise right from the beginning is that everything we do is destined for public domain. On the very odd occasion when we've done something that is a partner wanting to actually keep and exploit themselves the outcome, that has always been done on a different basis, whereby they had to pay wholly and fully for it in the normal terms that they would if they'd come to the university to do such a thing. They've been few and far between, quite deliberately. The agreements that we have with industry state explicitly that everything we do ultimately ends up in the public domain for the greater good of New Zealand, since that was the founding philosophy of the Quake Centre. So we have a resources portal, which you can just catch a glimpse of here, and that is the place where Greg finally ensures that everything that we produce ends up in one form or another, and it's made available. The individual benefit for individual partners comes more by way of their opportunity to participate really early in projects, to actually get hold of the levers and guide and steer the progress of projects and indeed what the outputs actually look like. They assist with peer reviewing the outputs and so on. So they get access much, much earlier than the rest of the general industry, and that's the advantage they get of being a funding partner, just as opposed to someone out there who's interested in what we do. So the Building Innovation Partnership, which I've mentioned a couple of times now, just very broadly, it's again an industry-led research program. By definition, that's where this pool of money comes from in MBIE. It's about $12.5 million over 7 years on that funding ratio that I said. It's, I guess in essence, it's all about improved and increased quality and productivity in the built environment sector, and it's multifaceted. It's structured around three major themes, and Larry will talk to you a bit about that, and Greg will talk to you in more detail about at least two of those themes. And it's led, importantly, with the assistance of an industry champion, or at least one, and in some cases two, associated with each of those three themes. So someone from industry who lives and breathes what that theme is all about on a day-to-day basis, and helps guide what the work is in that space. And in a similar fashion to the Quake Centre outputs, these outputs are also will be all public domain. Despite it having been operational as a program for effectively less than a year, we have achieved one major output, and it's already available on the resources part of our new BIP website. So there's a reflection there of what we've done in the past with Quake Centre. So with that, I'm just going to stop and hand over to Larry, who will talk to you about BIP, and then subsequently to Greg. Thank you. You can do it. Best you choose.
Thanks, Robert, and good morning, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Larry Bellamy, and I'm an academic staff member here in the Department of Civil and Natural Resources Engineering. What I want to do in my little slot is to give you a little bit more detail about the BIP program and the challenges that we're trying to address. And I guess if I could start with a statement which is that, you know, the building industry, well, let's say the building construction industry, is often in the news for the very worst of reasons. Often the stories we hear are bad stories about failure, companies going bust, and people being burnt. And when we started to form up this particular project and decided what were the most pressing needs, we didn't have a shortage of things to look at. In fact, so many challenges and so many issues that we've had to really try and narrow down what we focused on and pick what we think are key issues or key challenges which were appropriate for this program. So what I want to do is look at the three themes which make up the Building Innovation Partnership, the challenges that we're trying to address, the people involved, and what the outcomes are likely to be. And then I'll allow Greg to go in a little bit more detail about some of the work in themes 1 and 2. So there's some of the culprits or the criminals, what do we call the central people involved in it. So the three themes cover investments decisions for infrastructure. So theme 1 is about making better investment decisions, and our initial focus is on three waters. The second theme, that's the long title on the slide. The short title really is accelerating digitalisation of the building industry. And the third theme has a more engineering, hardware, engineering technology focus, and it's about improving the performance of the non-structural elements of buildings, fit for purpose building components. So theme 1, led by Ken Senning from the University of Auckland, and with John Mackey, who was part of Christchurch City Council being the industry champion. Theme 1 is primarily about trying to improve the decision-making around investment in three waters and infrastructure in general. I think it's true to say that in New Zealand, like a lot of countries around the world, we have an infrastructure deficit. In other words, over a number of years, if not decades, governments have underinvested, both central and local, have underinvested in infrastructure. Not all countries, and if you travel around the world, you can actually see quite clearly which countries have underinvested over a long period and those that haven't. But certainly in New Zealand, you could make a case that we've underinvested in infrastructure over many years. If you look at the investment per head of population. And so the question is, why is that? And why are we not investing as we were, say, 20 or 30 years ago in infrastructure? And what can we do to try and reverse that? Should we reverse it? Were we over-investing earlier? And maybe what we're doing now is right. And really the challenge for Theme 1 was spoken very clearly by John Maker when we were designing this program, and he said, look, we're going to go to the Christchurch City Council to ask for funding for an infrastructure project. I'm competing with a whole raft of projects. I'm competing with someone who's advocating for a new local library, someone advocating for a social event. And how can I show the benefits of investing in, say, a new sewage pipe buried under the ground, which may not actually create that much goodwill in the community compared to, say, a new library? How can I actually show the benefits for investing in that infrastructure? And so really the challenge was how to support decision makers to make wiser and more effective decisions around allocating a limited pool of financial resources, primarily our taxpayer, our taxes from the taxpayers. So the challenge in Theme 1 really is two things. One, how can we better quantify and sell the benefits of investing in infrastructure? And two, how can we tap data and analyse the performance of our infrastructure in order to have a better idea of, one, the risks of failure, and two, the benefits of upgrading or investing in new infrastructure. So Theme 2, and I'm not going to talk too much about that because Greg's going to come back and talk a little bit more about Theme 1. Theme 2, the challenge here is to try and accelerate digitisation of the building industry. And I've got here a chart put together, I think, by, was it Ernst & Young, one of the large management companies, comparing the various sectors in the economy and how digitisation has been brought through both in terms of their use of digital technologies, the upskilling of the people in the industry, and the assets that have been bought around digital technologies. And if you have a look, if you can read that, at the very bottom is construction. Well, not quite. At the very bottom is agriculture and hunting. And I would argue actually that in New Zealand, agriculture and hunting are probably above construction. I've got family members who are dairy farmers in the Waikato, and if I compare what those family members are doing with digital technologies, tracking cow performance, tracking pasture performance, digital maps, I think they're well ahead of the construction industry. So you could make an argument that the construction industry is at the very bottom. And the question is why, and what can we do about that? How can we help the digital technologies to penetrate the construction sector? So the challenge really is to support industry by demonstrating the value of various technologies and helping them to embed these technologies and these processes into their business operations. So I guess there is two parts to this challenge. One is to try and identify which digital methods and technologies might be useful for automating selected processes. And if you go overseas and look at the leading construction companies, they are using robots, they are using lasers, they are using virtual and augmented reality, so they are using digital technologies. if you go around construction companies in New Zealand, I think you'd be struggling to find any. Maybe one or two smaller companies have been looking at this. So that's the first challenge, is to try and identify the value case for various technologies. The second issue is, how can we actually improve the efficiency on the construction side, and how do we reduce the number of mistakes? And it's not just an issue for the construction sector, the contractors, but also for the design community as well, because mistakes and efficiency on a building site is often related to the quality and the completeness of design. So that's a very exciting theme, led by Robert Moore from the University of Auckland, who's New Zealand's leading BIM academic, and also by Ben Board from Trimble. The third theme is a bit closer to home, and this theme is, I guess, a little bit more engineering technology focused, and it's led by Rajesh Dakal and Tim Sullivan, who are professors here in the department, and our industry champion is Jan Stanway from WSP Opus. And this theme, when we looked at it, had so many issues related to it that I think the challenge is to take a systems view to a systems failure. Because if you look at the problems with poor performance of non-structural elements, all those parts of the building which aren't the primary structure, the facades, the ceilings, the pipework, the ducts, you can see that the poor performance that we've observed in various earthquakes over the last 10 years is not due to just one particular issue, but due to multiple issues and weaknesses all lining up, causing poor performance. So there are needs to improve the design of these systems, trying to harmonise standards, trying to understand actually what our design performance requirements should be. So even the philosophy of design, I think, needs to be revisited in this particular theme. Actually, a lot of these systems are designed on the fly. They're not actually designed early. So a lot of the problems that we're seeing in non-structural elements is due to the fact that structural engineers aren't dealing with this early. They're designed on the fly by contractors and subcontractors on the building side. Coordination. I could tell you a number of war stories about buildings, well-known buildings, where the mistakes are so appalling from leading contractors, where they have to rebuild parts of the building multiple times, purely due to lack of coordination on site and lack of quality assurance, and at the end of the day, components which do not meet the requirements of the building code. And so this particular theme is trying to address system failure. And with that, I'm going to stop while Greg comes up, and while he's coming, just take a moment to do some advertising, if I'm allowed. This is not actually a bit. Can I just leave that up there?
Yeah. Oh, no.
You're in my advertising slot. While this is not necessarily a BIP initiative, I'd like to just point out that coming up in 4 weeks' time, on the 28th of November, is the Hopkins lecture, and the theme will be related to some of the stuff that we're doing in BIP, which is infrastructure, and our speaker is Dr. Ray Wilson, who's had a stellar career in industry. So we'll put this through the QuakeCoRE channels so that people will get to see this, but just a heads up.
Thank you, Robert and Larry. So I'm going to take a little bit more of a deep dive into just a couple of topics that we've got in particularly theme 1, but also theme 2. So I'm going to discuss, so this was a presentation I gave to the Lifelines, but resilience is a key issue that runs all the way through our program. So we're not actually very far from where we started, and the reason we've got into theme 1 is particularly SCIRT, the SCIRT Learning Legacy. We understood the issues of SCIRT, and What SCIRT developed was some amazing systems to produce a high volume, high quality work to rebuild our horizontal infrastructure. And the key lesson that we got from that was that if you want to be good at recovery, you actually have to be good at business as usual. Recovery is the same as business as usual. You just have tighter timelines. Hopefully, you've got more money to do it. But you need a plan and you need good systems. So we started an initiative which is called the National Pipe Data Portal. So one of the things that came out of SCIRT was we just didn't know the condition of our pipe networks in the country. We know almost nothing about them, surprisingly. Some of them have been in the ground for 100 years, some of them for 30 years, but we really don't know much about their condition and how they're performing. So the aim is to build up a large data set of the pipes in the country. We discovered that if you're going to do this, you've got to do it the right way, and that has to start by having common data standards. We've got 67 organisations that manage pipes across the country. All of them work to different data standards. There's no interoperability. They call them different things. They've got taps or tobies, or some call them culverts, some call them, it's bizarre anyway. So we've also been heavily involved with the development of those data standards across the country. When we started this project, there was a program of work going on funded by the government called the Asset Metadata Standards Project. We were working in the pipe renewal space. We were very clear that we had to make sure that everything was coordinated. The Metadata Standards Project finished. Good project, but landed in the wrong place, and it's really been up to us to continue that going forward. And we're working very closely hand in hand with NZTA, who are spending $50 million in developing and implementing asset management data standards in the road space. So hand in hand. So what do? We created a proof of concept national pipe data portal where we mapped the data from 3 councils, Christchurch City Council, Tauranga and Auckland Healthy Waters, to a single data standard. And we used a tool called Bruce, developed by a company called Nextbase, to federate that data, and so we can look at it as a single source. And then we were able to visualize and analyze those data. So it's just looking at the stormwater network. Single view visualization, this is actually one data set, but the data remains in its native environment. We don't pull it together as in a data lake. We just do it dynamically when we need to. We can get global summary data, and we could start to do some basic analysis. We also provided back to the councils benchmarks on internally the quality of their data and the quality to an external standard. And the lessons we got out of that is that the technology is there, it's in everyday use in industry, it's fit for purpose, but we are missing the open data standards. And we are really missing in the country what we're calling the data commons, which is not only the standards, open data standards, but the system of managing those standards. And I think for many of you researchers in particular, when you go and start trying to look at infrastructure, you would spend a large chunk of your time trying to massage those data into a format that you can actually use. We think that we don't need to do that. We think that we can do this on the fly for you. That's the aim. So the other thing is the infrastructure is looking for central leadership, and we are spending quite a bit of time talking to MB and DIA and Stats New Zealand and the Transport Agency, and we are trying to work together towards something that's much bigger than the pipe data portal. So that's our ultimate aim. Our ultimate aim is to create the national digital infrastructure model. And I've got meetings up in Infrastructure New Zealand and with the Infrastructure Commission in the next wee while to try and get this thing off the ground. So I'm in a very privileged position, actually. My job is officially manager, but I don't really manage anything. My job is to actually go and corral industry. My role is to identify those needs and pull the people together. So I think the latest title I give myself is Chief Chivier. So cat herder, chivvy people up. And it's a lot of fun. So the National Digital Infrastructure Model, a digital twin for New Zealand. There are so many use cases for National Digital Infrastructure Model. Our problem is actually identifying the key ones that the government will say, yes, we will put funds against. We're getting there. But I think a single point of truth for emergency management is pretty important. Prediction of climate change and urban development and a transition to a low carbon economy are probably three really key ones. But where we've started and the work that Tien's particularly is driving in Theme 1 is informing investment strategies for new and existing infrastructure, particularly with a strong Māori perspective and links to the Treasury's well-beings framework. So that's really key for us. So what is the National Digital Infrastructure Model? Well, it's really just a way of federating data on the fly from a range of sources and then putting the analytics and visualizations on top of that to allow people to make informed decisions. The thing is, we're not going to be the sole digital twin that's being created in the country. The aim is that we can interact with others. And to do that, once again, it has to be done on a common data platform, common data standards platform. So that's where I'm spending quite a lot of time at the moment in and chairing something called the National Technical Standards Committee, where we're trying to coordinate this across the different agencies. And it's really at the moment just a coalition of the willing, when we're desperate to get some central government funds to help us to do this. And a very key aspect of that is the geospatial data. Sorry, I spelled that wrong. Geospatial data is absolutely key to this for infrastructure. That is the one thing that is common to all the infrastructures. Now, I discovered at a meeting the other day that Kiwi Rail does an awful lot of looking at bridges, some of which they own, some of which they don't, but the ones that NZTA own or local councils that go over their infrastructure. However, their ID is different to the Transport Agency's ID for that infrastructure. So we're trying to bring that all together into one place. One unique ID for infrastructure across the country. So our current state of our infrastructure is that it's a really weak evidence base. It's siloed, it's uncoordinated, and very, very inefficient. So we're trying to get to an evidence-based decision-making with a single source of truth where it's integrated, we can improve the productivity, and we can allow local people to make the decisions that they need, but they are informed by national priorities. At the moment, they are all made ad hoc in their own jurisdictions. So the critical success factors that we need there, we need data commons, we need common standards, we need platforms for support and development, so that's the digital infrastructure model, and we need government and industry leadership. So that's one of the things we're trying to corral. So just to give you an example, just this Wednesday I was facilitating a workshop for the New Zealand, for the Transport Agency. As part of their asset management data standards program, they have a need to define location standards. They thought they'd just pull this off the shelf. There must be no national location data standards. Well, actually there's not. So de facto, they are creating the location standards, the geospatial standards for the country. So they've done a desktop exercise where they're looking at the best international standards. But they're very aware that with this $50 million spend that they want to get the best value out of this. So the Transport Agency is taking a very, very mature view. They're saying these are not roads that we manage. These are utility corridors of which we manage the top few centimetres. And so they've called upon us to start coordinating the other industry players to make a decision to agree that these standards will be national standards. And we had a pretty good workshop. So there's an agreement that geospatial is going to be key, that when we share these data, it will be to a common standard, and that will be geospatially led. So things like the linear referencing system might still be in use within Kiwi Rail and the Transport Agency, but whenever the data is transmitted and shared, it will be done to a geospatial international standard, which will be an ISO, an open geospatial consortium standard. So that's a kind of diver summary as to some of the kinds of things that we're doing. We actually hope that we will be able to serve you with this data platform in terms of the research. The governance is a key issue, and access is something we have to set up. And so just watch this space. Cool. Any time for questions, I guess?
Thanks, Greg. Questions for Greg or Larry or Rob from people here or on the call?
Yeah, but
just in terms of what's happening internationally, what countries are currently on the side of us and overall,
Larry might be the best person to answer that question, but I'll start. Yes, in terms of the question, which is what other countries internationally, who are the leaders, what's going on? I mean, there's some really key ones. Singapore is doing quite a lot. The UK has something called the Centre for Digital Build Britain, which is huge. It's a £17 million investment from the UK government. But Scandinavians are really leading in the BIM space as well. But Larry's just come from an international tour, so I'll let him tell you.
My understanding is that it's largely driven by cities, not by countries. So if you have a look around who's doing digital twins, who's trying to use data to manage their infrastructure more effectively, cities are the driving force. So for example, Helsinki developed a digital twin and is continuing to develop a digital twin of the city years ago. So, but even in New Zealand, if you go to Wellington, they're well advanced in developing a digital twin for the city.
so the move to go national, I guess,
Yeah, no, we're not unique in thinking that there's a need to develop a national view. And so the UK have done it, although to be fair, when we went and visited them, came away feeling that they might have gone down the wrong path. They have tried to pull all the data into massive computers and trying to have a singular digital twin sitting on their computer, which we think is a huge mistake. Yeah, so there was a big warning for us, and I think probably New Zealand will head down a different track, which is very much trying to federate data or federate digital twins, digital twin of the road, talking to a digital twin for, say, 3 waters, and then trying to pull that together on the fly. Yeah, so yeah, it's interesting, and the difference between what we saw in the UK and what we probably wanted to do here is the UK approach was driven by the research community, and they had their own particular needs, and that's heading down that track. And it probably will end up being primarily a research tool, whereas I guess our mandate is to try and develop something for industry being like end users, which could be local government and central government. And I'm pretty sure the solution will be different.
Anyone on the video online with a question? Okay, well, just allow me to thank Rob, Larry and Greg once again, and obviously this recording of the presentation will be available on the QuakeCoRE YouTube page if you want to let anyone know that wasn't able to attend, and I'm sure I won't get my sort of hand bitten off in suggesting that any of the three of them will be happy to take questions or emails following the presentation as well, so if you have some afterthoughts, do let them know. So thanks everyone once again, and look forward to seeing the next seminar. I think this is the last one for the year. No, we have one again at the end, another month from now. So the last one at the end of November. So thanks everyone for joining, and see you next time.